When World War II ended in Ireland, what was happening in your life?
Well, of course, there were two phases. The war in Europe, I was still very much involved in school, and it didn't have the same effect as it had in England. Okay, we saw the newsreels and all that stuff in the cinema, and the celebrations, the D-Day celebrations or at the VE Day celebrations in London, and well, it didn't really affect us all that much. And of course, being Irish and all, we were not that mad about England winning the war, because we never thought of it as Great Britain or the United Kingdom was obviously. But and then of course when all the stuff came out about what was going on in Germany, and what they were up to, and of course we changed our attitude. But we were only kids, and that was the first phase. That was from about, I think it was April or May of 1945, and that's because we had other things occupying us. It wouldn't have been a major thing. But I will say this: that during the particularly the latter stage of the war, after the D-Day landing, the newspapers always get great coverage on where the armies were and how they were moving and all that kind of thing. And being a history buff as I was even then, I was always interested in all that. But so we were all fair with how the war was going, and at the end of the day, we weren't surprised that the Germans were eaten, So, and then of course there was movies being made. They were starting to come out all these war movies, and one thing is the comics the kids used to read. The Dandy and the Beano and all these things, and other comics as well. They used to have little cartoons, about the various characters in the war. There was one called Addy and Hermy. Now you might be wondering what Addy and Hermy means. It means Adolf and Herman Gordon, Gordon as well, and they make a fun of them, in the comics, because we got all the English comics, you see, and various others. It's another one with Mussolini had a character called Musso the Wop. Now, you wouldn't get away with calling it in Italian a wop, but that was a what you call it, a name they used to call it, Italians at the time, a wop. So Musso the Wop was Mussolini, and they used to have a lot of stuff about that just when we were kids, of course that all ended after the war. Then, like they went out of city. So at the end of the war, then you had they were following the Japanese, the war in the Pacific, and then when that ended, was coming coincidence, of course, was coming the time when I was moving on from school. I passed post office exam, and I left school. I left the start on the 3rd of September. Now, on the 2nd of September 1945, as you well know, Chair, the Japanese signed the surrender, Tokyo Harbor, I think it was the deck of the USS Missouri. But I could be wrong with that, I'm going to check that. But the next day I started my working life at 14 and a half.
How much did you make?
Well, I started off on £1.29 a week. Now my first week's wages was only 19 shillings and 9pence, because I only started on the Monday and you got paid on the Friday. So, although we were working a 6-day week, of course, so we got paid on the Friday, so that was only 5 days out of the 6. So I got 19 and 9pence.
And how much of that did you keep in your pocket?
Well, after the £1.29 was on the full, I kept the 2 and 9pence, and I handed the pound up to my father for the housekeeping.
Now, was there any taxation back then? Did you pay taxes?
Well, there wasn't tax on that. No, I mean to say, it wasn't that bad. No, well, and as far as I'm aware, anyway, and because we weren't paid, we were preparing to be. Eventually, we would preparing to be civil service, where you didn't pay, social insurance as
Yeah.
it became, or anything like that. So, I'm not aware of any what the tax situation was then, because we weren't involved in at that early stage. Our incomes weren't anything where they could tax us. And then, in due course, I probably got up to £1 10 shillings, I forget now. And then when I passed the exam, and 2 years later I became what they call a post office learner, and that was a couple of years after the war. And I think my wages, starting off wages for that was £2.10 a week, and then when I became a post office clerk, of course, I went up to £3 or then on up. But don't forget that the kind of the average wage would have been about £5 a week at the time,
Nothing.
Nothing. Well, it was bigger. And I'll tell you something, when I remember when I was still at school, we used to have a big sports day in our school. And this could have been maybe towards the end of my days at school. But I was, there was, I remember this, somebody sitting down beside one of the teachers, and they were chatting. And now I probably wasn't supposed to be listening in to what we're talking about, but I was hearing what we're talking about. I remember this teacher telling this guy that his salary was £5 a week. Now, this would be in the early 40s,
Different times.
Well, different to that, of course. I mean, and it'll come to think of it that way. And so, but that didn't change really until well into the mid-50s, towards the end of the 1950s, really. It was only coming into the 60s that, when people's wages started to go. Post office clerk was, I remember, when I was a post office clerk, and how I remember this is when I proposed to Rachel, would have been 56, 57, around that time. And I was telling her now, remember, I'm never going to have huge money. My wages will be at best £10, 7 shillings a week. Now, this was towards the end of the 50s. But of course, by the time we reached that, it had gone up, and then once it hit the 60s, it started to rise. Oh yeah, we had a big, campaign, the clerks, that and we were aiming for £20 a week. No, but this was like that was
money.
Oh, huge money. And I felt, that were over ambitious, But they kept that, and eventually, I think it would have been about 62 or 63. They eventually got to £20 a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop you for a second and say, what was your recollection of your first date with Rachel? Do you remember that?
I remember. Well, I do, of course. Well, it was different times. Yeah, Rachel and I met her at a dance one time, and she was 16. She had just turned 16. And I thought she was a bit too young for me, because at the time now I was 21. I wasn't on to 22, so what's this young one, Anyway, her face stayed with me. She stayed with me 2 years later, same dance hall, and saw her again. And as they say, the rest is history. It got off my mark, started the dance, and we never looked back. Now, I made the date, of course, the following week. We went to pictures, as we always used to do in those days. And I brought her home and did the usual. And we hit it off great from that time onwards. And that would have been in May, it was the month of May, because she was going to be 18, or she had just turned 18, and it was I think it was she was 18 on the 14th of May or the 12th of May. She said it was the 14th, but her mother said it was the 12th.
Do you remember where you actually met her
I do,
on
of
your
course.
first day? Where was it?
On the first day.
On the very first days, like when you met her, like in Cork, there was a place called Egan's Clock.
Yeah, I know,
Under
I know.
Egan's
The clock, Cleary's clock was the place where everyone was to meet. No, I don't know that we met. I can't remember exactly, but we had the pictures anyway.
Oh.
And you went to Savoy in O'Connell Street, so we probably did meet at Cleary's.
Oh, yeah.
But as I say, we had already. I left her home from the dance in Orswell.
Yeah.
So we had already, decided we were going to be united more or less, and it took us 3 years before we got married.
And the rest is history.
And the rest, as you can say, sister, you can see Laura there, and she wasn't the first to go.
All right.
Eamonn, do you have any recollection of rationing or how things were in Ireland during the war years?
Yeah. Well, you see, Chair, I wasn't at home during most of the war years. I wasn't living at home. I was living in St. Vincent's, and we weren't concerned about the rationing or anything like this. But at the end of the war, when I did come home, the emergency was still on. All the rationing and all this up to 1947. So we did experience that. So my ration book came home from the school to my home, but everyone had a ration book. But by that time, that it was eased up. I mean, you could get plenty of tea and that. But I remember the tea was rationed, and half ounce of tea, I think, something like that, per week per person. But of course, there was black market, and my grandmother down in the country was a terrible fond of her tea, and she used to say, "You're in the country, I drink tea 20 times a day." So, but she used to. My uncle used to have to go into the town of Athlone and buy tea on the black market, because everything used to be available on the black market. This was during the war years, and he'd pay a pound for tea for his mother. Now, that was huge money.
That was huge money.
But she was addicted to tea. And but that was during the war when we were kids. Because we used to go down there and look for the summer holidays. And a small farm, But anyway, apart from that, I didn't experience much about rationing, because it was nearly over by the time I came home from school. The other thing I do remember, though, is the shortage of fuel. Coal wasn't coming in from Britain as during the war and that, and there was these enormous big stacks of turf, peat, in the Phoenix Park, loads of them, and they were that's where all the turf was coming from. And that lasted well up to 1947, because I remember going, there was a very hard winter, 46, 47. The winter 46, 47 was particularly severe. And places were snowed in and all this kind of thing, and it seemed to last forever, the snow. And the turf we were getting in the local turf merchant, and it was all wet. It was terrible trying to light your fire with wet turf. I remember that winter. That was for winter 46, 47. But apart from that, now, after that, then a lot of rationing and all that kind of stuff eased up. The coal started to come in then from Britain. So the turf was a big deal. Because everyone relied on the turf for lighting fires and even cooking in some people, who may not have had a gas cooker. And not in our house, but they did in some places. But, we all got, nobody talked too much of it. But there was a lot of hardship, but people didn't look at it that way,
What was it like when you picked Laura up for the first time in your arms?
Well, no, that's a long time ago, yeah. No, of course, it was delightful. And I'm trying to picture it now. Where was she? She would have been in the hospital. There was a hospital, St. Kevin's Hospital. It's down in Miami. It's not there now, of course. And that's where she was born. And thanks be to God, it was everything went well. The birth went, and so it was down in that hospital that I first got an opportunity to take her in my arms. And I tell you, delightful experience, and has been ever since. So, you know, as you know, it was very special to me. And she still, but that's all those years ago.
And she's still special to you, Eamonn.
Well, of course. Not when you can see that. You know, yeah, okay, you know what, she may have a different view, you know, but I think we've a great relationship.